Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Constein, joining you from ACU's latest, most southerly satellite in Cusco, Peru. Today, we're going to be talking about how to present on leadership theories, and we're going to be looking at this through an assignment from COMM 645. Because we're 4 weeks into this session, I'm going to breeze through our normal introduction about writing center services, and let's go right to the meat and potatoes, which I will say down here in Cusco, Peru, there are some nice potatoes and lots of varieties that you simply can't buy in the US. So these are our two main objectives today. We're going to look at this assignment and pick it apart, what it's asking people to do, and then we're going to look at a particular task in that, which is citing and referring to leadership theories. Now, no matter what you are doing, explaining why you are focusing on the things that you are, why you are weighting the things that you are, why you are paying attention to or encouraging certain details is a really helpful skill. And that's something I was very pleased to see in this assignment, much as you would in our EDD program, because it's really drilling down on, well, hold on. Who said this was important? What did they mean by that? What were they using it for? So let's take a look at this assignment first. So this is coming from the Global Leadership Leading in a Diverse Context course. So we have this Leadership Theories Comprehension Topic assignment, and it asks you to refer to a slide deck. Well, okay, sure. Let's take a quick look at that slide deck. So if you see my screen right now, you can see we have a PowerPoint. We have a list of a number of theories. We have a brief description of each of those theories. We have some information about it, some provocative questions, and other details here. So depending on which theory you are choosing, there is a lot of information in here. Now, I do want to call your attention to some details here. We have a professor cited here. Great. We have some theories, some of which have names attached to them, like Fiedler's least preferred coworker theory. Some of them have abbreviations, like that example, LPC theory. Cognitive resource theory sometimes gets abbreviated CRT. And we have some other stuff going on there. So let's first, I'm going to park your eyes on one slide just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. And then we'll jump back to our slide deck. So take a moment and read through this. Okay, let's jump back to our main slide deck now. So after you've read through that, you can take a look at what the assignment is asking you to be doing, but I actually recommend that you do it in reverse, that you look at the assignment and ask what it's asking of you, because just like a leadership theory emphasizes the importance of certain details, reading the assignment instructions gives you an idea of what kinds of details you should be paying attention to and taking notes on when you read through the slide deck. So the assignment asks you to choose one leadership theory on which to be an expert and to present upon. And then you have a variety of different presentation media. You can do a PowerPoint deck. You can make a brochure, a handout, a video presentation with some sort of performance or other thing arising from this. But the goal is to demonstrate the leadership theory. And that there'll also be a one-page write-up on that. We're going to zero in on that other part in a moment. So if we look at the grading, we see that the criteria for 2/3 of the points, actually 3/5 of the points, and so that's about 60%, is have you met the project guidelines? Have you polished and proofread stuff so that there are no grammatical or spelling errors? Has your presentation been creative in some way? and captured the audience's attention? Have you made it relevant to the audience and thoroughly presented the theory? So in some of those examples we were looking at earlier where it has many pages, if you only do the first slide or two, then that's not going to capture all of it. And then to get full credit, it's saying the clear, concise write-up that you do must exceed expectations, which includes being free of grammatical and spelling errors, and captured all the major theoretical components. Now, you'll note that this is not asking you or requiring you to do outside resource searches. You're not required to go and research other things. You certainly could, but start with what is required, because as you can see, this is just going to be a one-page write-up. And believe it or not, a lot of people have more trouble with the one-page write-up than a 3 or 4-page write-up, because you have to be so concise. And when we see that there are these details to capture all the major theoretical components, including explaining what its praxis is, traits and skills that are associated with it, and the pros and cons with some connection to intercultural competence, that's actually giving you a list of very specific things that you should make sure that you are describing in this assignment. Let's take a look back at that previous slide. So this second one, you have the write-up explaining the theory, traits or skills associated with it, pros and cons of leadership with regard to intercultural competence. That list should sound rather familiar, because that is exactly the list that we are getting in the rubric. So it's saying, do all of the things. And it's not that you couldn't include more things, but probably you're not going to have space to include those other things if you're doing all this into a one-page write-up in, more or less about 250 words. So stay on track, stay on target, and make sure you're doing the things that you're required to do first. So let's talk about how to cite those theories, because again, the material that we're looking at, we are starting with a set of slides. We're sitting with literally a PDF that was given. So, if you're looking at this, this is actually giving a whole lot of information. We have theories of leadership. We have a name associated with it. But we are not getting a ton of other stuff there. And so this is something that we actually get questions at a lot at the Writing Center. How do you cite a piece of material that you got from a course? Well, I'm glad that you asked. So that's what our second part of today's presentation is. We're going to talk about how to cite and reference leadership theories in APA style. And we're going to start with the general approach, and then we'll talk about with the specific resources that you've been provided for this class. So an APA citation normally has 2 to 3 key pieces of information in here. For most sources, if you're not quoting directly, then all you need is who wrote it and when was it published, like the list of author name or names and the publication year. But if you are quoting directly, or you're taking very close notes on for yourself, or you're just paraphrasing and you want to make sure that your reader can find that exact space, for example, if your professor required you to include page numbers for paraphrases and summaries, then you would include the where. And the where within a larger work do you find it, that's going to vary depending on the source. If it's a video, then you're going to give a timestamp. And that could be 1 second within a larger thing. It could be a range. If it's a paginated material, then you're going to give the page numbers. If there are paragraphs but no page numbers, you can count the pages. And if there are slides but no pages, otherwise, you go by the slides as they're numbered. If they're not numbered, you just start counting at 1 and go from there. So let's take a look at how this might look. So who wrote it? Okay, an author, say Chase. When was it published? Say 2014. And if you did need to cite the location, things like page, paragraph, number, or time range, and a slide number would go right in here. Slide 1, slide 2, slides 1 to 3. And then how would that appear in a sentence? You'd have wording like Chase's 2014 theory of disaster leadership. In most cases, when you refer to a theory, you want to give the author or authors and then the name of the theory written in sentence case. And I point out sentence case and emphasize that because in the PDF that you have, and in much literature that is not formatted in APA style, theory names will be capitalized in title case instead. And if you want full credit, you do want to make sure you're doing this in APA style as is generally required in our courses at ACU. So let's just think about, what does a reference look like in APA style? Take a moment. Let me rephrase the question. What information is going into our references list? Well, if you read the text in italics, you'll know that we only include references for sources that you read directly. You can cite something through a secondary or even tertiary citation, but the references that go in the references section, that's a list of the things that you consulted directly. So let's look at some ways of referencing leadership theories. You could have, according to Adermo's 2014 theory of static leadership, or in their theory of women's leadership development in Christian higher education, Dalvig and Longman emphasized the importance of, or strongman leadership theory as defined by Higo and Reed emphasizes. And let's take a moment to consider what the implications are of having these details here. Because there's actually more than one theory of static leadership. There's more than one author who's named something a theory of static leadership. So when we have a Dermos, that's telling us, oh, developed by that person. Also, many authors will refine their theories over time and in following publications. And when you are referring to it, you're not always referring to the original version, and you're not always referring to the latest. So having that specific version cited lets the reader know why you are perhaps leaving some things out. So for example, there are many theories that were developed more generally and then refined to fit a certain context. And if that's not the context you're working with, well, then it may not be the most helpful or applicable version of the theory. And so you might be citing an intermediary or an older version of it, or a version of it modified by someone else. Now, in this second one, this is actually citing a publication by Dalvig and Longman that was working on articulating a new way of understanding how women's leadership was developed in Christian higher education. So it is a theory of leadership and leadership development. You won't find an earlier source by them because this is their article articulating it. And so this is something where they are originating it. And if you're writing about this in 2015, this would be the only citation. Now, they have since done more studies. Other people have built on it. Other people have applied it to different contexts. So if you're using a different version, you want to be citing the original one. And then sometimes there are things that become very common, kind of mainstream, like strongman leadership theory. And you'll say, well, okay, we're not using a super specific version of this so much as we are using a generalized, this is what people tend to mean with strongman leadership theory. And so it's not so much that Higgett and Reed created this, but that you're using the version that they describe so that when someone's like, okay, so what do they mean by strongman leadership theory? They can check that and say, oh, yes, that we understand. Now, the other thing I want to emphasize here is the way that these different phrase structures are referring to the source. So the first one is setting up a summary of some details about that theory. The second one is emphasizing what the authors were trying to do. And the third is basically saying, oh, this is a key tenet of that particular theory or family of theories. And so you might use one or all of these depending on your context. So let's take a look at those course slides. And here I've just screenshotted a bit of text on it, and you can see we have these different theories grouped in some cases like behavioral theories, contingency theory, situational theory. And again, remember that you want to be using sentence case, not title case, when you are formatting theory names in APA style. You also want to make sure to include a citation for the specific version of the theory that you are citing. And if you're citing the original authors directly, make sure you place the publication year after the names and after the apostrophe S if it's in there, so that we know that you are referring to that publication of their ideas. And if you're only accessing the theory through a secondary source, cite and reference that source. Now, someone just sent me a question, which you are, of course, welcome and encouraged to do. Ask, what is a secondary source? And I suppose we should link that back to the earlier discussion of a secondary citation. So a secondary source would be something where you are getting information from something that isn't the direct original source, but is referencing that. So a classic way that might show up would be if we had this primary source, and you should see some blue text on the screen now. So the primary source is Smith 2012, and our secondary source is, let's say, Anker 2024. And so the way this would show up in text would be something like, oh, according to Smith 2012, as cited by Anker 2024. And that shows us that you're referring to Smith's ideas, but you're saying, hey, I didn't read Smith 2012 directly. I'm getting this from Anker's summary of that. Now, you'll also see a number of variations on that depending on what they're doing. And so you might see as quoted by. So if you're working off a text that you read by Smith, but you read it in Anker, then that's how it will be cited. So the primary source is Smith 2012, and the secondary source is Anker, because that's the one that you're reading, and it puts you one step removed from the original source. So in many cases, when you're reading journal articles on leadership theory, there'll be secondary and tertiary sources, the tertiary sources being things like textbooks. And you usually wouldn't use a textbook for more than a very general discussion of a family of theories. Whereas if you're discussing specific ones, you want to be going closer to the source. So generally that means primary or secondary. Now, let me give you one more example here before we move on. So here's how that would look if you had a secondary citation. So it's clarifying you're referring to Smith's cognitive resource theory, but you read it through Anker. Any questions about that part before we move on? All right, well, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. All right, so what about materials from this course? Well, it turns out that APA Style has a guide for just that. So let's take a look at that. All right, you should now be seeing my screen, and I'm sharing the APA Style website, where if we went to the references homepage, there's a whole set of sample references under reference examples. And in this case, we are looking for online course. And we see that there is this online course in MOOC references section. And a lot of times people will just look at this first one here and say, oh, I got it. I'm just going to cite the whole course, and then they'll stop. But it turns out that you can be more specific. And when you are referring to a particular lecture or a particular piece of reading, or in this case, a particular slide deck that was provided, that you can actually go more detailed. And so to get full credit, you would want to be using the second set of information. Now, this particular example says lecture, but it can be any course material that is within that course website. And I want to call your attention to a couple of things here. So it does say here that you want to provide a link that will resolve for readers, meaning if they were to enroll in this class at ACU, the link would take them to the right place. Now, it says here that this should be to the main page for the course. So we're not citing the specific slide deck, we're citing the course, but this information here is where you give enough stuff to find the specific slide deck. Now, if we go to the slide deck, let's see what information we have here. Well, we have Kagendra, a name. All right, great. And that's it. We have no numbers here, but you can see on the left-hand side, it tells us just counting the slides from 1. So we could cite particular slide numbers. And we have a name that we might be able to do something with. So here's the question. If you were taking this course, how would you try and find out who authored this information? You know, who wrote the course web stuff? And that's something where with courses, it's a little bit variable, because sometimes there are courses that are in a program where everyone is taking the same standardized course. And so the person who's teaching it is different from the person who developed it, who wrote the material. So if we were to look at the roster for this course, we would see a different name than the person whose name is on the slide deck here. And okay, so where will we go with that? Well, we want to take a look at what we can do following those guidelines. So we can see here who wrote the material. All right. We have the year that it was posted, if that's known, and the year that it was authored. We have the title of the material. That's here. We have the type of material, MOOC lecture. You could put PowerPoint slides. You could put podcasts, depending on what the thing you're looking at is. We have the list of authors for the course as a whole, if that is known. We have a title of the course, the platform that it's on. So in this case, it's edX. In the case of the course, that would be ACU Online. And then we have a link to the course itself. And you can see whatever author goes down there will be in our citation here. So let's go ahead and now go one step further. So who wrote it? If we're just talking the course in general, that's ACU Online. When was it published? Well, we don't have a date. Leadership Theories SlideShare. Okay. PowerPoint? Yep. Well, it was originally PowerPoint. So you might replace that with, say, slide deck if you're getting it as a PDF, in which case we would just go ahead and update it like that. And if you did have a specific author here, and you were going to, you looked around and you said, okay, I found Professor Kagendra's name. And then you'd have the first initial there. Now, this is going to require that you find that professor. So, you know, there's one of those questions of, do you cite the author there if you can, absolutely. If you are missing key information, then you will fall back on the larger corporate author, which is ACU Online, which is why we have that as our first thing here. So looking at this, how would these elements look like if we put it together? Well, if you are unable to identify the original author's full name, and we don't know if Kagendra is the given name or the family name, then you default by citing the corporate author, which is ACU Online. That is not wrong. It is more ideal if you have the individual author, but this often there are little pieces that aren't there. And so having enough here for us to track down the rest is enough. All right, so we have the Leadership Theories SlideShare PowerPoint in this course, ACU Online, and a link to that course's website. And so if you were citing that, you might have, according to the contingency theory, ACU Online and pure D period. Now, an excellent question that you might be thinking now is, but wait, you were telling us about slide numbers. Why don't we provide a slide number there? Well, let's think back. When I was talking about the pieces of information in a citation, I mentioned that it's 2.5 because who wrote it? When was it published? We always want that. That's what keys your reader to your references list to find the rest of the information. But we only need to have that other information like a page number, a paragraph number, a timestamp, or a slide number if we are quoting directly. And especially because the paper that you're going to be writing is going to be very short at approximately 250 words, you want to be as concise as possible. And so including extraneous information like the slide numbers is just going to take up some space. So let's wrap this up now. And so let's do a review of what we've talked about. So we began with our two goals here: to understand this assignment, what it's asking you to do, and how to cite and reference the different leadership theories in this. And to conclude, let's go ahead and take a look at some of those theories and talk about how that might be discussed or how you might extract this. Now, a good way to quickly give yourself an overview is to just look at the table of contents and then scroll if you're using something like Mac Preview or Adobe Acrobat, where you can preview the different slides. And we see, all right, there are 2 slides on that. I can see that some of this is more background information, like emphasizing charismatic. Okay, got that. Is the fact that charisma is the Greek word for gift relevant to this? Maybe not. Depends on the particular argument you're making. But I can look at this and see, all right, well, if I am going to be describing trait theories, there's a lot to go on here. And you might say, I don't think I can do that in a concise 5-minute presentation and a 1-page summary. And so I'm going to look for something that's shorter. Or you might look at this and say, that is all the details I need to do a really good 1-page summary. So you can use the fact that the technology lets you do a quick overview to plan things out somewhat. Now, let's say we're talking about the contingency model or the Fiedler model. Now, I want to differentiate between 2 related things. A model is a plan for how things work. You can propose a model. A theory is the explanation that is offered for how that model works. There are other things a theory can be, but in this case, the theory is explaining what's happening. And so we could say that the model emphasizes the three-step process of identifying leadership style, defining the situation, and matching leaders and situations. Whereas you might say that the theory states that a well-functioning leadership system has 3 steps. So the theory is the articulation of the ideas. The model would set up specific steps. We often get confusion from students about the difference between theories and concepts and models. And sometimes something has become a theory over time after the model or the concept was tested and evaluated. And so it can be a little confusing, but remember, this assignment is asking for you to explain the theory. So while you might discuss the model, it is not the defining thing about it. It is a key element, but you want to make sure you are giving the theory that states, oh, X is important for Y, rather than focusing on the model at the heart of it and leaving out that explanation for how or why it's supposed to work or work well. Okay, I think we're going to be wrapping up there. So let's just finish our recap here. So we started with looking at this assignment here and emphasize that this is really saying, do the things that are listed first, do it within the space constraints. That's up to 5 minutes if you're doing something that unfolds in real time. PowerPoint up to 10 slides. That your 1-page write-up should be doing these specific things, explaining the theory, traits or skills associated with it, pros and cons of the leadership theory with specific regard to intercultural competence. And that focusing on the intercultural competence is really the key to being able to do this in a concise fashion. We talked about the different APA methods. We talked about incomplete information and sources and how when you don't have the author or information for an individual component, or you don't have the complete information, and just if you're wondering about that professor's name, I tend to go just by Professor Basil or Dr. Basil. So a lot of students don't actually know what my last name is or can't spell it correctly. And so in this case, it is okay to default to the corporate author. If you're able to track down exactly who that professor is and get their first initial and their family name, then you can make an even more specific thing, and then your citations would be referring to them by name. But ultimately, the reference will point people towards that course website on ACU Online. All right, for any additional questions about APA, I encourage you to check out our APA pages on our website. You can go to the APA style website itself for more examples. And if you have writing needs where you would love to get another set of eyes and feedback on your writing, go ahead and make an appointment with the Writing Center by going to my.acu.edu and under Academic Resources, selecting the Online Writing Center and following the instructions. We have appointments available for this week and up to 2 weeks ahead. You can make up to 2 appointments per week for an hour at a time, and you can make both email appointments or real-time Zoom appointments. And with that, we're going to wrap things up for this webinar. If you are planning on joining us for the next one, we'll be back on the hour.